Okay, this week it's Gav and Dave. We're talking about the $1 billion man, Vladimir Putin, out in Mongolia. We're chopping, we're dicing, we're slicing up the news, just like Ronco, only better and more handsome. So, Dave, what's Vlad Putin doing in Mongolia?
Well, there's actually quite a few things he's doing. And one of them is he's trying to get the Mongolians to approve and pass a pipeline that's going to go from Russia through Mongolia to China. We all know the war in Ukraine has been going on for close to 1,000 days now. Been going on for a very long time, and the Russians still have a lot of excess oil they need to get rid of because the Europeans are not wanting to buy it. So they've got a customer down south in China that's very hungry, that's putting out a lot of stuff about wanting to improve their green energy infrastructure, but they still need oil. They've got a lot of people, they've got a lot of factories and a lot of stuff to run. And the easiest way to run this is, well, why don't we just build a new pipeline through Mongolia? So we've got existing infrastructure in place. We're going to build it through Mongolia, and we should probably talk to the Mongolians before we actually try to do something like this. So old Vlad decides, I'm going to show up in Mongolia, and the Mongolians are going to be, well, we're going to give this guy a state visit because he's going to make a huge contribution potentially to our economy. Russia exports, I think it's 1.4 billion in terms of crude petroleum to Mongolia, and a lot of this goes on to other countries, and a lot of it goes through Mongolia to China and to other places where it's actually used and put into manufacturing and put into use by those countries and their industries. And
And to
the
give you a nice,
Russians,
sorry, go
go
on.
ahead, Gavin. I'm
We're all bashful. Now, just to give our audience some perspective on this, you can tell I researched this before, which is why I'm trying to shoehorn it in.
yeah,
Uh, 1.5 billion represents about 1/20th of Mongolia's entire GDP. And that's just the oil value going through the country. That's not counting everything else the Russians can bring to the Mongolian economy. Now, Dave, what's the fly in the ointment with old
well,
dad's trip?
I guess that the fly or like the sand and the Vaseline here would be Mongolia signed the Rome Treaty back in 2002, and they're technically part of the ICC, the International Criminal Court. And Vladimir Putin is a wanted man internationally. The international man of mystery. I mean, you could have a new Austin Powers movie named after this guy. Potentially, it probably wouldn't sell very well because you'd be probably having to deal with sanctions and
It'd
probably
be really
featured only
depressing.
in Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan would be my guess. It would probably be a big seller there and maybe in the Tuva Republic. Who knows? Probably those three places it would do well. But I
Belarus,
couldn't see I
Belarus.
couldn't see Spielberg jumping in on this. Maybe Michael Bay. You could see Michael Bay jumping in there and doing some special effects.
Oh,
Okay, Vlad, get on
you
your
know who I
horse
can see jumping in
and
on
take
this
off
day.
your shirt.
You always know who I can see jumping in on this. Obviously, the man to play, the man of the moment is Steven Seagal.
Yes.
Steven's available. I know Steven's available. Steven's
Hmm.
always available to Vlad. They're old friends. They went to college together.
Yeah.
Anyways, Steven Seagal, Michael Bay, probably produced with our old friend
Gary.
Mr. Lukashenko, somewhere
Yeah.
in Central Asia, somewhere in Turkmenistan. Vlad on horseback, going through the dunes, rescuing people, and so forth. Kind of like the Lone Ranger, except I don't think the Lone Ranger was wanted for war crimes, and Putin is. So the issue is the international rule-based order, which is a buzzword you've probably heard a bit of if you've been following the news. International rule-based order does not like this because if you sign a treaty, you need to follow through on it. However, as we've noted, the potential economic contribution from the Russian Federation is about a 20th of the GDP. The Mongolians are caught between a rock and a hard place. They could refuse this pipeline. It would not end well for anyone. They're between the Russians, who have no problems invading their neighbors, and the Chinese, who seem to do everything but invade their neighbors. So this is not a route that the Mongolians want to go down. And that's why he got the state visit. No arrest was made.
And on top of that, too, for Putin, this is a big win for him at home where he can travel to a foreign country and he can continue to flip that old bird to the West, where he goes to Mongolia, which is very now, since the end of the Soviet Union, closely aligned with the US and South Korea and many Western countries in terms of being democratic and upholding a lot of Western ideals. But at the same time, they're tied to Russia and China economically. So they're in a really bad neighborhood and they've kind of got to do what they've got to do. And Putin knows this and he's going, okay, West, you guys can throw out whatever kind of arrest warrant or sanctions, anything you want at me. And I'm just going to deflect it, deflect it, deflect it. Just like Steven Seagal, except Steven Seagal's a lot bigger and he's going to take those hits, but he's going to come out on top.
Also, unlike Steven Seagal, Vladimir Putin didn't spend the whole time sitting in a chair. But yeah, I mean, it's an unfortunate situation in some ways where the Mongolians really are aligned with the West and really would like to keep it that way. But there are also some geopolitical realities that they can't ignore. And Putin and Xi Jinping are just two people they can't really say no to as much as they'd like to. What has been interesting, I think, in the last couple of days is there have been people in the West who've been batting around the idea of even sanctioning the Mongolians for this. I don't think that's a good idea. This is definitely something that you should formally condemn and say you should have followed through. You're a member of the Rome Statute. When the South Africans refused to arrest Omar Bashir a couple years ago, before he was deposed in a coup, they were reprimanded for it. They were given to eat a lot of humble pie, but they weren't kicked out of the Rome Statute, and they weren't really sanctioned for it. And I don't think sanctioning Mongolia is going to make a positive contribution to the situation. As tempting as it might be to blame someone.
Yeah. And I would just like to share one more thing too, that a lot of the US news media has not really shared with its readers, that the United States as well is not a member of the ICC. So I think it's very kind of ironic that we are calling out the Mongolians, especially a lot of the NBC news. Here I am. I'm basically screaming and shouting and shaking my little stick at major news media here, and they're not even telling
not for
their
the first time,
readers
Dave.
or their listeners that the United States actually does not abide by this either. Where our country sees the U.S. Constitution as the supreme law of the land, and I vehemently believe in it as well. But you've got to look at this and go, Gavin, what is that face? No, but you've got to look at it and go, the American people and the people reading this deserve to know that this is not part of this either. And if you're not going to share that tidbit of information with the reader, you're not doing your job as a news media organization.
It's important context. It is important context to just point out that, well, I probably disagree with a bit of what you just said. What I don't disagree with is it's very difficult. It's fine to go, this is unfortunate. They really should have followed through their treaty obligations. But the United States has never signed the Rome Statute, has actually been against signing the Rome Statute, has had no interest whatsoever in joining the ICC, and has actively interfered in ICC investigations. There were investigations launched into our conduct in Iraq and Afghanistan that were basically shut down because the US was just completely non-cooperative. So we don't have much of a moral platform to stand on. Certainly other ICC members do and should condemn this. But coming from the US, it's a little rich when we're not only not party to this, we're really quite against it. And that actually seems to be a pretty bipartisan position, one of the few we have left. So that is important. and it goes, unfortunately, it goes along with a long American history of very selective intervention in international affairs. We're the country that came up with the idea of the League of Nations and then never joined. We're the country that came up with the United Nations and then refuses to act multilaterally with the United Nations when we're not the one calling the shots, which has been the case ever since the Korean War. So, again, this is a situation where you go, yeah, the outrage is real, but the context is important. And we're on the fringe. I had to drop it in. You got to drop it in somewhere. Sometimes it's not
I
already.
agree.
You just got to say it. You just got to go.
You do.
We're on the fringe. We're on
You're
the fringe.
fringe.
I mean, I can't, actually get the tinfoil hat out in the middle of these things. So it's just better to say we're on the fringe.
I think it would be a good idea if you had one and you just like stick it on right there in the middle of it for people to see, but then that's too much work.
They're like hard to make. If you ever made a tinfoil hat, they're not easy.
No, I've not. I've never seen the need to make one. Maybe I should.
They're a fun arts and crafts project. So I've been told.
That was your summer camp last year, right?
Was my summer camp this year. What are you talking about? I'm not going to go into that. I was about to go somewhere. I'm just staying on the fringe. Anyways, we're on the fringe.
We're gonna sign off for now.
We're out there. I don't know where we are. We're in the middle of a field somewhere.